tutorial number 3. It covers sessions 11 to 13 approximately, and I'm going to go through the relevant diagrams with you. The economy is overheated, and so policymakers wish to reduce the level of output in the economy. They decide to sell bonds in order to do so. With the aid of a well-labeled diagram, describe in detail the appropriate policy to implement and its effects on the economy. I've put a link to the appropriate video that you should watch. This is on monetary policy and the transmission mechanism. So I suggest you start by watching that. And this is just the reverse of what's shown in that diagram. So remember, if the Reserve Bank sells bonds, it's like giving out these bits of paper they promise to repay, in exchange for money. It's contracting the money supply. So as the money supply decreases, remember that shifts your LM curve to the left. And we're going to go from equilibrium, where your IS intersects your LM, equilibrium here, Y0, interest rate I0, to ultimately to your new, where your new LM curve intersects your IS curve here at E dash, interest rate I dash, and income or output level Y dash. So income falls, interest rate rises as a result. But as this video shows you, we don't just jump from that equilibrium to the next. We actually first move this way and then ultimately towards E dash through a transmission mechanism, this process of adjustment. And it's very important to understand that process to see how effective monetary policy is going to be, and sometimes where it can break down. And I think it's extremely difficult, as I suggest in that video, to understand this process without looking at what happens on the money and in the goods market. So that's what I'm going to do next. And we're going to start by holding income constant. So holding income constant initially, when your money supply falls, we move here to E1, to this equilibrium. So let's have a look at what's happening in your money market. So this is your money supply to begin with. We draw it vertical. This is your money demand, or your liquidity L, liquidity demand curve. Holding income constant, therefore, remember that along a given money demand curve, income is held constant, right? So you start where your money demand intersects your money supply. Here's your equilibrium, interest rate I0. How do we get to the new equilibrium where your new smaller money supply shifts to the left and intersects your money demand curve here? Again, process of adjustment. At your initial interest rate, the lower money supply, your money demand is still over here. So the quantity of money supplied is less than the quantity demanded. People want more money than is available. So they're going to get rid of their bonds, sell bonds in order to get more money. So when they sell bonds, price of bonds are going to fall as a result. And we know there's an inverse relationship between the price of the bond and the interest rate, their yield. So interest rates start to rise. So we move along your money demand curve. Okay? So people getting rid of bonds, interest rate rises, and until we get to this new equilibrium. As the interest rate rises, remember that it's like the opportunity cost of holding money. So this brings about equilibrium again. The higher the interest rate, the less you're going to the quantity of money that you're prepared to hold, the lower the quantity of money demanded. So as the interest rate rises, people start to demand less money, quantity demanded money falls, we move along the curve until it matches the new lowered quantity supplied of money. And that explains that process, and that's holding income constant. So we go back to this diagram, we see that holding income constant, your interest rate rises up to here as your money supply has contracted, your LM curve shifted to the left, and income's constant there. Now, how do we explain this movement here from E1 to E dash? Let's have a look at what's going on in turn in the goods market. So here we have the goods market. As a result of an increase in the interest rate in the economy, investment declines. And we know that that will shift your 80 curve down. And as a result, you're going to go from this equilibrium to this income or output will fall. So as your interest rate rises, is ultimately going to cause your income or output to fall. That in turn has an effect in the money market. So it's complicated because this is reality. So your money demand curve, remember we draw it for income held constant. Your money demand curve is actually going to shift a little bit to the left. It's going to intersect your new lower money supply curve somewhere over here. Call it R dash. So ultimately your interest rate has still risen, but not as much as it did initially. So as your money demand shifts to the left, because income has fallen as a result of lowered investment. So let's go back to your diagram. Okay, so as your interest rate starts to fall a bit, as a result of your money demand curve shifting down, your income's declining, we see that we moved to this new equilibrium. So to recap, start off at E, here, this income level and interest rate R0, money supply contracts, we're holding income constant. We saw that as a result of portfolio disequilibrium, people getting rid of bonds, their price falls, their yield rises, we move to here. Then as interest rates rise, investment falls, your AD curve shifts down, income starts to fall as a result, and we also see money demand falls and it lowers the interest rate a little bit, and we get to that new equilibrium. So that explains that process. Okay, next question. Question 2 says, compare the effects of the monetary policy that we've just gone through, contractionary monetary policy. If your demand curve is, your money demand function is this as opposed to this. So we see the only difference between these two money demand functions is in this coefficient here. This is much larger than this. So remember, what is this saying? This is your liquidity or demand or preference, money demand. Over here, your money demand is way more sensitive to the interest rate. This gives you your sensitivity of money demand to the interest rate. Much greater here than it is over here. So this is going to correspond with a flatter LM curve, this function here. And a flatter LM curve is going to render monetary policy more ineffective. And why? Because you're going to get a small change in the interest rate leading to a small change in investment and output and so on. So if you think of this at the extreme, if your LM curve is completely flat, money demand is very sensitive to the interest rate, monetary policy is rendered totally ineffective. If you have a change in money supply, all it does is this, no change in output. Question number 3. Again, have a look at those links, just to recap what is your money demand function, what K and H mean, what these sensitivities are. Question 3 says the South African Reserve Bank has observed that the public are prepared to hold whatever amount of money is supplied at a given interest rate. That's what I was referring to just now. That's your horizontal LM curve. The liquidity trap, we call that. Discuss what would be the most appropriate policy to use to reduce the level of output. This discussion should include any relevant ISLM diagrams. Once again, I've given you a link to a video you might find helpful. But basically, this is the situation we've got. The horizontal LM curve, monetary policy ineffective, just does this, no change in output as a result of the change in the money supply. Fiscal policy is very effective. This shows you what happens if you've got an expansionary fiscal policy. You have a full multiplier effect working, there's no change in the interest rate, no fall in investment to crowd this out, etc. And you get the maximal effect on output. In the case of a contractionary policy, it would just be the reverse of this. Your IS curve would shift to the left and output would fall. So fiscal policy, highly effective in that instance, not monetary policy. Question 4 says, compare the effects of an expansionary fiscal policy when the investment function is I is equal to 160 minus 80I, when the investment function is I is equal to 160 minus 35I. Again, the only difference is in this coefficient here next to interest rate. Remember, this is a different thing. Once again, I've given you links to relevant videos. But this is an investment function, it's not a money demand function. So this is showing you how sensitive is investment to the interest rate. And over here we can see that investment is way more sensitive to the interest rate than over here when it's 35. 80 as opposed to 35. So this corresponds with a flatter IS curve, and we're going to see that that is going to result in fiscal policy leading to more crowding out. Why? Because as your interest rate changes, it's going to cause a very large change in investment, and if the interest rate's gone up as a result of fiscal policy, government spending, going to have a huge decline in investment, a huge fall in output, and you're going to have extensive crowding out, and fiscal policy, therefore, expansionary fiscal policy is going to be less effective in that instance. Finally, the National Treasury would like to implement contractionary fiscal policy. However, they would like to ensure that the level of investment does not change. They have approached the monetary policy makers for assistance. Discuss how monetary policy could assist. Your discussion should include relevant ISLM diagrams. Over here, this shows you that this has shown an expansionary, say, fiscal policy and being accommodated by expansionary monetary policy. And we can see that you go from IS 1, LM1, where they intersect, you go from this equilibrium to where your new IS intersects your new LM over here. Output would increase, leaving the interest rate unchanged. If you want to see this for contractionary fiscal policy and how monetary policy could accommodate that, it would just be the reverse. Your IS curve would shift to the left and your LM curve would shift to the left, so you'd go from this equilibrium to this. And output would be reduced without any significant change or possibly no change in the interest rate. And that is when we accommodate fiscal policy. So we use monetary policy to ensure that the interest rate doesn't change by much, so you don't have that crowding out effect, etc. Of course, this is going to depend on what your particular policy goals are and what monetary policy, for instance, is trying to achieve in your economy as to whether you can actually implement this. I hope that this helps you with your tutorial.